Good morning, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. So we all know that a plantation forest investment takes upwards of 25 years to be harvested. But what if I told you you could get a slice of the economic return that it provides partway through? Production thinning can be more than just thinning for residual stand health, but it can also provide an economic return. My name is Sam Taylor, and as part of my final year research project, I've been looking into the viability of production thinning in New Zealand. But the question is production thinning a viable option for New Zealand plantation forestry? Today I'll be talking to you about three parts, some previous research into the space, my research, as well as some of my results I found along the way. Thinning is an integral part of a plantation's rotation. The removal of trees, whether it is through production thinning or thinning to waste, helps with the competition between trees for nutrients and water. So how much of our radiata stands are actually in production thinning? In 2003, 20% of this total area of radiata plantations were in production thinning. This then dropped in 2020 to 12% at 190,000 hectares. This is exactly the reason why I chose this topic. I want us to be increasing our production thinning area rather than decreasing it. Through my literature research, I identified some of the key productivity effects on harvesting and extraction. For harvesting, it was tree volume and tree forkage, while for the extraction productivity, the main effects were extraction distance and slope. The main part to my research was an industry questionnaire. I found this to be the best source of information to draw on the knowledge of current thinning crews as well as kind of the recent thinning crews. There were 8 crews across 6 different companies involved in this survey. One of them was a 4-man crew, 5 of them were 3-man crews, and there were 2 2-man crews. The main insights I kind of got from it were production per day, typical piece size, typical extraction distances, minimum recoveries for where they were still production thin, maximum cartage distance to the mill, some of these effects on productivity, and as well as have they increased or decreased the production thinning in the last decade. An example of these results is the production levels. These range between 60 and 185 tonnes per day, with an average of 125 tonnes per day. To gain a more accurate understanding of production levels, I decided to do a time study. This time study, I did it on a 2-man crew down in Southland over a 3-day period in June. Some of the harvesting elements I decided to measure were felling, processing, positioning, flaring, and delays, while the 4 elements were unloaded travel, loading, travel fully loaded, unloading, positioning, and delays. For reference, these were the machines used in the time study. As well as this, for the harvester, I counted the number of logs cut per stem, and for the forder, I counted the number of logs loaded and unloaded, and then the distance measurements that it traveled. The time and associated number of logs or stems and the distances were then accumulated to form linear regression equations to do with time and this dependent variable. An example of this is the travel fully loaded time in relation to distance traveled. Another example of this is the loading time taken to load a certain number of logs. 17 time and log load sets were used for this, with a total of 792 logs loaded over the 3 days. Both of the relationships in these 2 graphs were to be as expected. Moving on to the productivity. The first 2 productivity values I made based on tree piece size were 0.5 and 0.7 tons. These were estimates from the harvest manager, while the third was based on the average number of logs, the average piece size loaded onto the forder across the study, as well as the average number of logs cut per stem to get an average piece size for the tree. These range between 62 and 97 tons per day. I then compared these to literature, and Erickson and Lindros in 2014 determined a productivity of 73 tons per day, and Acuna et al. In 2017 determined 94 tons per day. These are both comparable to my study. Extraction productivity based on log piece size with the same assumptions from the harvesting productivity, as well as 3 different extraction distances, totaling 9 productivity values ranging from 66 to 106. These were a lot more consistent with my literature review findings, namely Erickson and Lindros in 2014 determining 84 tons per day, which is in the middle of my productivity data for the extraction. Daily operational costs. I calculated these based on 2019 informed data and Lero costing model. I then took the production rates from the crews and determined a harvesting rate in dollars per ton, which I found to be quite useful. Looking at these harvesting rates, these range from $27 to $64 per ton, with an average of $37 per ton. I then thought best to go back to the crews and tell them what I got, and got them to comment on whether it was high, low, or in the ballpark. Of that, 5 of the crews replied. 2 of the crews said that my calculations were too low. 1 said it was too high, and 2 were in the ballpark. This was pretty good science. I then compared it to some literature as well, namely Heisel et al. In 2015 determined New Zealand $47 per ton, and Bayek in 2018 with $24 and $32 per ton in New Zealand dollars, further confirming that my calculations are within the range. Today I have discussed some of my research as well as a few of my results to do with production thinning in New Zealand. And based on my research, I have determined that production thinning is a viable option for our plantation forests in New Zealand. And I would like to think that you think so too, if you'd like to read into my report. It's almost done. Thanks for listening.
All right, and Sam has just brought up a great point, is that all of these colleagues that you're listening to, they will be presenting, so they will be submitting their final reports, and not too long after that, we'll put all of those reports up on our website, so for you to get a lot more detail on these particular projects. So questions from the audience or from the Zoom audience?
Yeah, I've got a question, Reen, for Sam.
We can hear you nice and clear.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, Sam, good presentation, good study. You've obviously covered productivity and cost really comprehensively. I think that's great, given the dearth of information previously around production thinning. Just a question for you around the products that were being manufactured from those production thin trees. And did you look at what price was being gained from the sale of those products to determine the economic viability given the range in costs?
No. So I originally wanted to look into the economic viability of it, but I soon found out that it's pretty sensitive with some of the information, let alone the harvesting rate, so it's pretty hard to get the information around it. I would have liked to look into that, but I did get information on some of the log grades that they did produce, but I didn't get any information on kind of what they were selling for.
No, that's fine. And one other question around, I guess, the effect on the crop. I mean, you know, the reason why we thin, and you've covered that right at the start, that it's, you know, it's all about the tree health and the viability of the crop trees. Did you do any assessment of the damage to the crop trees from the mechanised harvesting systems?
I didn't look into that too much. It was kind of an area that I skipped over at the start. But I had a bit of a conversation with the time study crew, and it comes down to that contractor experience. And like the stand that I was in, the residual trees seem to have no damage. But yeah, that is a big problem. I did read a few papers around that to do with the residual stands, because at the end of the day, it is still a silvicultural regime and need to protect the tree crop value. So.
Yeah, that's good. Okay, thanks very much.
All right, thank you, Keith. Another question? Audience, sorry, Mr. Frodgen.
There was another presentation based on just wondering if you look at any biomass potential for the protection period. Whether you could use and just offset it by carbon emissions that already did, you know, calculate reduction of emissions as using coal.
Yeah.
So just the question from Steve Frodgen was with regard to what's the opportunity here for the biomass component, perhaps from production thinning, perhaps offsetting carbon and or carbon credits, that component.
Yeah, I didn't directly look into that. At the start of when I was looking at my research topics, that was one of the topics I wanted to look into, but decided to go with production thinning. It certainly does have the potential. It is lower grades, and you are producing stuff that can be used as biomass to help with the bioenergies in the future. And with the increase in demand for bioenergy, I think that it's a very good opportunity for supply of biomass in the future through production thinning. So.
Along Keith's point, there's a tension between you're doing a harvesting operation within a silvicultural regime, and you showed that productivity increases with piece size, and there's a natural tension there for the loggers to want to thin late, and the silviculturalists to, you know, it's quite hard to fight that battle. Did you notice that in your research in terms of your question?
So sorry, just for the Zoom audience, the question is, you know, in terms of the operational crew, you're after the biggest piece, as in you'd like them to thin late. For the silvicultural team, they're probably asking you to thin early, which of course is a smaller piece size. So is there a tension there, and what's your perspective on that?
I think that, like, through my literature reviews, I kind of didn't see a lot of tension between. No, there wasn't too many comments on it. But I definitely know that it's there. Talking to the crew during my time study, they realized, they knew that it was still a silvicultural regime, needed to protect the final crop, so they were in there to get out the trees that need to be thinned with the smaller piece size. And at the end of the day, yes, it does bring down that productivity, but it's trying to find the balance between the two. Harvesting operation, trying to make a little bit of money where you can. Like, it isn't a huge profit margin that you get with production thinning. That won't ever be the case, but it's, at the end of the day, as long as it's greater than the cost of thinning to waste, then I see it as a great opportunity, because you get to produce grades that you normally wouldn't as well. So.
Yeah. Actually, I do see we've got an international audience here as well. We've got Mr. Joe Curry zooming in from the eastern side of the US. Actually, Joe, if you can hear me, do you know what the current thinning logging rate is over on the eastern side of the States? Assuming you're listening at the IEs there.
Yeah, I got you. Well, the eastern, in the southeast pine, I would be reluctant to give you an accurate number. Because I just don't work in the pine, you know.
But yeah, you're mainly working in the Appalachian hardwoods, right? So yeah, but
Right.
I know that in the Eastern pine, obviously some very big thinning operations are very common. So, okay. Hey, one last question. Yeah, sorry, Joe.
No, you're right. It's a absolute standard practice.
Yeah, standard practice, as you can see by Sam's presentation, isn't in our forest. And I guess Sam has made a very strong case that perhaps it should be. One last question, otherwise I'll wrap it up, Mr. Wells.
Yeah, was the operation visible with a second rotation forest? I guess what I'm meaning was the infrastructure, roading and stuff in place, or were they having to visit?
The question was to do with infrastructure and whether they were first rotation. I only went to one forest and no, it was first rotation. The infrastructure was kind of put in like a week or two before they kind of went in. It's that is another problem, especially in the first rotation, because you don't have the money there to front up for the infrastructure cost to put them in that early. So it's again something to look at, kind of a compromise between the two.
Thank you.
All right, very good. Thank you very much, Sam. Yeah.